So I think the drivers behind it are fairly obvious. And the answer really is virtualization. It's not a fix-all, but it is a business concept of virtualization. Again, same acronyms could apply: cloud, SOA. Applying that in a I guess you could call it a cloud-like nature. So whatever acronyms or verbs in some cases you want to use to describe that, that's definitely the direction, and probably the reason they wanted me to speak here today. But what are the options? What are the costs of doing it? What are the pitfalls associated with it? What's cloud to mean to any of your organizations? Are you going to build your own private cloud? Does it matter what you call it? Does it matter how you deliver it? So I'd like to help at least answer what path that might take for you, what we've seen as some of the best practices of how to approach going down that path, whether you've already implemented virtualization, whether you're on your second wave of virtualization, whether you've already started cloud, or whether you haven't touched it at all. There's an entry point for everybody. This is just one slide from the session we have later, which is more of a product session. This is an educational session, so I don't want to get too much into any of the product stuff. But just to understand some of the methodology and best practices in how we look at it, we have a typical, I don't know show up too well, but a typical strategy, planning, engineering, and ongoing program management type of methodology for approaching this, and certainly experts in each of those areas. Mostly what we'll talk about today are the technologies, the virtualization, the cloud computing, the IT architecture. If you're interested, especially in these other areas, again, that's that session I have at 1:30. We'll be focusing a little more on that, especially on the facilities. There won't be a lot of overlap with this. And so the virtual data center, I sort of look at it as a business function. How do you compartmentalize what IT does and present that in a usable format to the business? How do you provide those interfaces that things like SOA and such promised in the past but didn't necessarily deliver? And I think that virtualization of all types really offers an opportunity for IT organizations to provide that in a more homogeneous way, that you can actually deliver services in a standard way across platforms. Certainly not all. There are some applications you're going to have mainframes, but again, mainframes in a lot of cases are inherently virtualized. So I not specific to the technologies, but specific as a business function. If you look at what a data center gives your business, that's what I like to focus on, starting with those business requirements. So the parts of that business function, certainly your IT operations, your staff, the people that make it happen, your processes, but also your technologies, the storage, your compute resources, your network resources, your storage resources, and all the management infrastructure that supports that. At the top of the list for starting this type of process, the planning up front is absolutely huge. And I've seen a lot of times where there isn't enough upfront planning, not enough upfront investment in that. You sort of jump into virtualization. Now, that's not to say you can't jump into virtualization in a small way to start, but doing the right planning so that platform is scalable, it fits with the rest of your infrastructure, and you can really grow into it, pays immense dividends. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I think it takes some real specific experience to do that as well. So definitely, sort of a quote I use a lot is, see the doctor. Talk to somebody who has experience in it, whether it's a peer, a colleague, or consultant, or whoever, somebody who's worked on this sort of thing before, and find out what the pitfalls are, especially if you're looking in a particular direction. And I'd say probably the last on that list would be vendors, but looking at a architecture or what have you is definitely, I've seen some people take a tough path there too. So when I talk about cloud-like services, private cloud is probably the direction, if any of you that have your own data center would go in. And again, that would be sort of putting the wrapper around your services and your virtualization, just presenting those services to your end consumers, whether that's individual users, business units, and you all have this today. Webmail, those type of applications. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what cloud is. I'm sure most of you get a show of hands of who has some type of server virtualization in their environment. All right, and how many of you is that commercial versus any of the open source options? Okay, so a fairly good percentage as well. In those type of environments, how many of you looked at it as just a server platform as opposed to also making large changes in the network and storage environments as well? So how many just touched the server platforms in doing virtualization? Okay, so a couple hands, and that's usually I get quite a few more hands on that. I don't mean just, of course, you're going to add switch ports and things like that, but a drastic re-architecture, usually for virtualization 1.0, is kind of out of the question. If you look at consolidation ratios since, say, 2000, 2001, we're way past a 10-to-1 consolidation ratio, even if you compounded a 10% year-over-year growth for your business. You're still looking at immense, Moore's Law has been more than fulfilled over the last 10 years in terms of compute resources, and storage and network, more network than storage, have kept up with that pace. And I think it's all the more valid that type of planning is absolutely critical. You can't just throw in switches and servers anymore and make it happen. So what are some of if you were going to look at cloud options, what are some of the options you might look at? The two main options I look at are outsourcing it. So if you look at just buying cloud from another vendor, which is probably not something a lot of you would do, or if you're running a data center, you might be looking for somewhere else to run a data center. You can sort of insource yourself, which I look at is providing your own type of internal cloud environment. Again, building that wrapper yourself, but doing it in a cloud-like way. And then option 2 is virtualize yourself. And you might say, well, what's the difference? We'll talk about that in a second. We'll also touch on why the overall IT architecture is important and why there's so much hype around the cloud computing. I think a good point in why there's so much hype, it's about wrapping. So how do you wrap different apps? How do you wrap email? Well, webmail, we've had that for 10, 15 years. Well, how do you wrap ERP? Well, that depends, right? And that's often a very painful question for a lot of organizations. Or how do you wrap CRM or any of your types of internal applications, or how do you wrap VDI, virtual desktop? And how many of you have any type of virtual desktop infrastructure today? Oh, that's good. That's a good show of hands. That's great. Yeah, I heard about the project going on. My brother-in-law is one of the IT guys up at RIT. So we have a couple people here from RIT. Up in Rochester Institute of Technology, actually. I live in Tampa now, but I used to live up in Rochester, so pretty familiar. So it was great to see them down here. All right.